and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, you have the next episode of Recent Reads, and it's going to be a much shorter one because as of right now, halfway through Sunday, I've read 2 books this week. Yes, just 2. I'm slowing down a little bit. I'm enjoying myself. I'm enjoying the journey. If I don't feel like reading, I'm not picking up a book, and that's totally fine. I'm wanting to read more, so next week I probably will have more books to talk about. And unfortunately, one of these was kind of so-so, and the other one was a little bit disappointing. So I'm going to start by talking about the one that was just a meh reading experience, and unfortunately I'm probably going to unhaul it. I think what ended up happening, so let me mention what the book is. The book is Madly Deeply, The Diaries of Alan Rickman. And I knew going into that this was his diaries and was not an autobiography or a memoir or a biography, but I expected the diaries to read a little bit more like some of the early ones included in the appendix at the end did. And additionally, I listened to this as an audiobook. So this was on my list for April's reads as a possibility, and I'd had it on hold at the library to get through, and it came in literally the day that April ended. And I was like, okay, let me go ahead and read this. I don't know how long it will take if I postpone this audiobook. So I went ahead, and this is not on my May TBR. So I've gotten through one book on my May TBR. This, I mean, part of it, it would have been really awesome to have this read by the author himself. Unfortunately, obviously, it's not. These were published posthumously. And additionally, at the beginning, it says that they don't know whether or not he ever intended for them to be published. That didn't necessarily sit well with me because I'm like, these are his diaries. Yes, these are his honest thoughts, but at the same time, if he didn't mean for them to be published, why are they being published? What was the motivation behind publishing them? And there were a lot of interesting takes and the way that he looked at things throughout his life. Most of this is from the mid-90s until just before his death. And so obviously it includes some of the works that he's most known for. It does not include Die Hard, which is where he sort of burst onto the scene, even though he'd been an actor for decades. It includes Sense and Sensibility. It includes Harry Potter. I had hoped that he would talk more about it. He talks in depth about one of the last movies that he did. He talks a lot about it, and I thought he would have talked more about Harry Potter because that was so much of the latter part of those years, but he doesn't. And additionally, it reads very clinically, and there's not a lot of entries that go into depth on certain topics. A lot of them are very like time, did this, went here, etc. And they're edited a little bit as well, so it doesn't necessarily include everything that he put in there. So I just don't know. And that was disappointing to me. I listened to this on 3 times speed, could understand it definitely, but at a certain point I was just getting through it and just listening to see if there was anything that was mildly interesting or thought-provoking. So unfortunately, even though I specifically looked for this in the Strand when I was there in December, I'm probably going to be unhauling this. Now, before I talk about the book that I read physically this week, I do want to mention that I still really enjoyed this book. It just did not have the same appeal as an intro to a series that the first book by this author that I read a couple months ago did, and that is The Adventures of Amina Al-Sirafi. I did enjoy the voice of Amina telling her story and snapping at the scribe. And at first I'm like, are we going to find out who this scribe is and how they're connected? You do. Obviously, probably more will unfold about that. At the beginning, it's very much historical and not fantastical. You know there's an element of the fantastical to deal with her, I think, fourth husband and fourth and last husband. There's just this allusion to something. But when it really gets going, that's when I became utterly captivated with the story and could not put it down. And she ends up crossing the veil, basically, I think is what they call it, that space between worlds, and being on the side where you expect Daevabad and those sorts of creatures. And that's when that really starts to get going. Now, there's a little bit of magic before that with the antagonist, who I guess is not the overall series antagonist, which is good because he was a little bit comic book villain type. But once that happens, about 4/5 of the way through the book, because about 400 pages in, I was hooked and I could not stop reading. This is definitely a setup book, introducing the series, the world. It's so intricate, and you can tell that Shannon Chakraborty has really researched this era to know the history of it. And there's so much history of this part of the world that the Western world really doesn't care about, doesn't know about. And they're like, okay, there was stuff over there. And they sort of discount it. But this is the pirating adventure. It's not in the Atlantic. It's not in the Caribbean. It's in the Arabian Sea. It's in the Indian Ocean. It's in that area between the Arabian Peninsula and India. It mentions the Maldives. It mentioned they go to Mogadishu. That whole area of the world is fascinating and has such a complex and rich history. And I'm talking myself into an even higher experience or recollection of it. This was really good. It just didn't have that little spark on the edge that City of Brass did, but this one, I still love it, and I really enjoy Shannon Chakraborty's works. So there you go. Those are the 2 books that I read this week. Hopefully, I'll get some more read next week, and they'll be even more enjoyable. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.